The hospital room felt eerily quiet, the soft beeps of the monitors punctuating the silence like a ticking clock. I cradled my newborn twins, their tiny faces scrunched in peaceful sleep, oblivious to the turmoil that was about to unfold. A gentle knock at the door startled me, and a nurse entered, a somber expression etched on her face. "Mrs. Archer, this letter arrived for you," she said, her voice laced with poorly concealed pity. I took the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. As soon as the nurse left, I tore it open, my heart pounding in my chest. The words seemed to blur before my eyes, but one phrase stood out in stark relief. I want a divorce. My world shattered in that moment. Calvin, the man I had loved and trusted, the one I thought would stand by my side through thick and thin, had betrayed me in the cruelest way imaginable. The letter went on to reveal his affair, his decision to abandon me and our children for another woman. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I clutched my babies closer, as if they were the only anchors keeping me from drifting away into a sea of despair. How could he do this to us? After years of struggling with infertility, these precious little ones were supposed to be the culmination of our dreams, the embodiment of our love. But Calvin's absence spoke volumes. He didn't even bother to show up for their birth, too consumed by his selfish desires to witness the miracle we had fought so hard to achieve. The man I thought I knew had become a stranger, and the life I had envisioned for us was nothing but a cruel illusion. In that moment, I made a silent vow to my children. I would be the strength they needed. I would protect them from the pain and betrayal that their father had inflicted upon us. And I would rise above this, not as a victim, but as a survivor, forging a new path for myself and my family. It was a long, sleepless night, punctuated by the soft cries of my babies and the shattering of my own heart. But as the first rays of dawn filtered through the window, I knew that this was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would write my own story, free from the shackles of a broken marriage and a broken man. I clutched the divorce papers like a lifeline, my knuckles turning white with the sheer force of my grip. Calvin's words cut deeper than any knife, his cruelty slicing through the very core of my being. "You're delusional if you think you can handle raising those brats on your own," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You'll fail as a mother, just like you failed as a wife." My brother Evan, who had taken me in after I left the hospital, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Don't listen to him, sis. He's just trying to hurt you." Calvin scoffed, his lips twisted into a sneer. "Hurt her? I'm just telling the truth. She's nothing but a burden, and those kids are better off without her." I flinched, his words like physical blows, but Evan's presence gave me strength. "Get out of my house," he growled, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by a protective fury. Calvin shrugged, his cold eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before turning on his heel and leaving. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the soft whimpers of my newborn twins in the nursery. Evan enveloped me in a warm embrace, and I clung to him, my body shaking with the force of my sobs. How could he be so cruel? I choked out, my voice muffled by his shoulder. "He's a coward," Evan said, his voice laced with disgust. "But you're stronger than him, Miranda. You've always been the stronger one." His words resonated deep within me, igniting a spark of determination that had been flickering beneath the pain and betrayal. I pulled back, wiping the tears from my eyes, and nodded. "You're right," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. "I can't let him break me, not when I have these 2 precious lives depending on me." Evan smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "That's my sister. Now let's focus on getting you and the twins settled. You're safe here, and we'll figure out the next steps together." As I held my babies close, their soft breaths brushing against my skin, I knew that Evan was right. Calvin might have shattered our family, but he couldn't destroy the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. I would rise above his cruelty, his insults, and his attempts to diminish me. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would write my own story of resilience and triumph. The soft coos of my twins filled the air as I rocked them gently, their tiny fingers curled around mine. It had been a few months since I had taken refuge at Evan's place, and the wounds of Calvin's betrayal were slowly starting to heal. A knock at the door interrupted my reverie, and Evan poked his head in. "Hey, you've got a visitor," It's Derek. My heart skipped a beat at the mention of my old college friend. Derek had been a constant source of support during those tumultuous times, his unwavering friendship a lifeline in the midst of the storm. "Send him in," I called out, unable to suppress the smile that crept across my face. Derek stepped into the nursery, his warm grin instantly brightening the room. "There's my favorite little family," he said, his eyes twinkling with affection. "Derek, it's so good to see you," I said, rising to embrace him with one arm, the other cradling my precious bundle. He returned the hug with gentle care, mindful of the fragile lives nestled against me. "You're looking well," he murmured, pulling back to study my face. "Motherhood suits you." I felt a flush of pride at his words, a stark contrast to the constant barrage of insults and put-downs from Calvin. Derek had a way of making me feel valued, seen, and understood in a way that my ex-husband never could. "Thanks for being here," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you and Evan." Derek waved a dismissive hand. "Don't mention it. That's what friends are for." His expression grew serious, and he lowered his voice. "Have you given any thought to the legal proceedings?" I nodded, my grip on my children tightening instinctively. "I want to fight for full custody. Calvin doesn't deserve to be a part of their lives, not after the way he treated us." Derek's jaw clenched, his eyes hardening. "That bastard doesn't deserve anything," he spat, his usual composure slipping for a moment. "But don't worry, Miranda, I'll make sure he pays for what he's done." A surge of gratitude washed over me, and I reached out to squeeze his hand. "Thank you, Derek, for everything." His features softened, and he returned the gentle pressure. "You don't have to thank me. Just focus on being the amazing mother I know you are, and leave the rest to me." As Derek left, I couldn't help but feel a sense of renewed strength and determination. With him by my side, I knew that I had a fighting chance at building the life my children deserved, a life free from the toxicity and pain that Calvin had brought into our world. The road ahead might be long and arduous, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hope blossoming in my heart. Calvin might have shattered my dreams, but with the unwavering support of those who truly cared for me, I knew that I could pick up the pieces and create something even more beautiful, a future where my twins could thrive, loved and protected, untainted by their father's cruelty. The soft glow of the laptop screen cast a warm hue across Derek's face as he leaned back in his chair, brow furrowed in concentration. I watched him intently, my heart thrumming with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. "Are you sure about this, Miranda?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "Once we set this in motion, there's no turning back." I nodded, my resolve unwavering. He brought this on himself. It's time he faced the consequences of his actions. Derek let out a long exhale, running a hand through his hair. "All right, I've gathered enough evidence to bury him, but we need to be smart about how we play this." Leaning forward, he began to outline his plan, his words precise and calculated. "We'll start by issuing a formal demand for a fair settlement, custody, child support, and a substantial alimony. If he refuses, we'll have no choice but to go public with the information we have on his shady business dealings." My stomach twisted at the mention of Calvin's professional misdeeds. The man I had once loved and trusted had been living a double life, engaging in fraud and deceit that threatened to unravel his entire career. "Do you really think he'll cave?" I asked, my voice laced with doubt. Calvin's always been so arrogant, so sure of himself. Derek's eyes hardened, his jaw set in a firm line. "He'll have no choice. Not when the evidence is this damning. We've got him cornered, Miranda. It's time to make him pay for what he's done." A surge of determination coursed through me, fueled by the memory of Calvin's cruelty and the pain he had inflicted upon me and my children. I had spent too long cowering in his shadow, allowing his manipulation and abuse to dictate the course of my life. No more. "Let's do it," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "I'm ready to take back control." Derek's lips curved into a grim smile, and he nodded. "Then let's make that bastard squirm." Over the next few weeks, we meticulously prepared our case, gathering every shred of evidence and fortifying our legal strategy. Derek was a force to be reckoned with, his razor-sharp intellect and unwavering determination a formidable combination. As the day of the mediation approached, I could feel the tension building, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. Calvin had no idea what was coming, and I couldn't help but savor the thought of wiping that smug grin off his face. When the moment finally arrived, I steeled myself, drawing strength from the knowledge that I was no longer fighting alone. Derek was by my side, a steadfast ally in the battle against my former tormentor. As Calvin strutted into the room, his arrogance practically radiating from his pores, I felt a surge of power course through my veins. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. The game was on, and this time I held all the cards. The tension in the room was palpable as Calvin swaggered in, his cocky demeanor a stark contrast to the grim expressions on our faces. Derek took the lead, his voice calm and measured as he laid out the terms of our proposal. "We're prepared to offer a fair settlement," he said, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "Full custody of the children for Miranda, along with child support and substantial alimony payments." Calvin's eyes narrowed, his lip curling in disdain. "Are you kidding me? You expect me to agree to those outrageous demands?" I could feel my blood boiling, but before I could speak, Derek raised a hand, silencing me. "It's a generous offer, given the circumstances," he said, his voice taking on a razor-sharp edge. Calvin scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. "And what circumstances would those be? You have no leverage here." Derek's expression hardened, and he reached into his briefcase, retrieving a thick file. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." With a flick of his wrist, he scattered the contents of the file across the table, revealing a damning trail of evidence, financial records, email correspondence, and detailed accounts of Calvin's fraudulent activities within his company. The color drained from Calvin's face as he rifled through the documents, his bravado evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Where did you get this?" "That's not important," Derek said, his voice laced with steel. "What matters is that we have more than enough evidence to bury you, professionally and personally." Calvin's eyes darted between us, his mask of arrogance crumbling as the realization of his predicament sank in. "What do you want?" he growled, his hands clenched into tight fists. "Exactly what we asked for," I spoke up, my voice steady and unwavering. "The settlement, no contest on custody, and your silence. Agree to our terms, and this information stays buried." Calvin's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with barely contained rage. For a long moment, the room was deathly silent, the weight of our ultimatum hanging heavy in the air. Finally, he let out a sharp exhale, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine, you win." A surge of triumph coursed through me, but I refused to let it show on my face. Calvin had brought this upon himself, and for the first time, he was the one left powerless, stripped of his arrogance and control. As he scrawled his signature on the settlement papers, his hand trembling with barely contained fury, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The nightmare was finally over, and I had emerged victorious, not just for myself, but for my children. Derek and I exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of our shared triumph passing between us. We had played the game, and we had won, leaving Calvin to face the consequences of his own actions. As we gathered our belongings and prepared to leave, Calvin fixed me with a venomous glare. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. I met his gaze unflinchingly, a newfound strength burning within me. "Yes, it is," I said, my voice unwavering. "You lost the moment you decided to betray us." With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving Calvin to stew in the wreckage of his own making. The battle had been hard fought, but in the end, justice had prevailed, and I had reclaimed the power he had tried so desperately to strip away. The future was uncertain, but for once, I didn't fear it. With my children by my side and the unwavering support of those who truly cared for me, I knew that I could weather any storm that came my way. Calvin had made the mistake of underestimating me, and now he would pay the price. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the silent kitchen as Calvin hurled his tumbler against the wall, the amber liquid splattering across the pristine tiles. His face was contorted with rage, his knuckles white from the force of his clenched fists. "That bitch," he snarled, pacing like a caged animal. "How dare she try to ruin me?" His mistress, Samantha, watched him with a mixture of fear and disgust, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "Maybe you should have thought about before you decided to screw her over," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. Calvin whirled on her, his eyes wild with fury. "Shut your mouth," he growled, taking a menacing step forward. "This is all her fault. She's the one who pushed me into this." Samantha recoiled, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't you dare try to blame her for your own mistakes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You made your bed, Calvin. Now you have to lie in it." Calvin's laughter was bitter and mirthless. "Oh, I'll make her pay all right. She thinks she's won, but I'm just getting started." As he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows, Samantha sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. The illusion of their perfect life together was rapidly unraveling, and she couldn't help but wonder if she had made a grave mistake. Meanwhile, I sat across from Derek, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee as I recounted the events of the mediation. He listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I can't believe he had the audacity to threaten you," he said, shaking his head in disgust. "The man has no shame." I shrugged, trying to mask the residual fear that still lingered in the depths of my heart. "It's just empty bravado," I said, forcing a smile. "He's all bark and no bite." Derek's expression darkened. "I wouldn't be so sure," he murmured, his voice laced with concern. "Calvin's a desperate man, and desperate men are capable of dangerous things." A chill ran down my spine but I pushed the uneasy feeling aside. "Even if he tries something, we'll be ready," I said, my voice resolute. "We have the upper hand now." Derek nodded, but the worry lines etched across his forehead didn't fade. "Just promise me you'll be careful," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand in his. "I don't want anything to happen to you or those beautiful kids of yours." I squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his unwavering support. "I promise," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We've come too far to let him win now." As the days passed, Calvin's world continued to crumble around him. News of his professional misdeeds began to leak, spreading like wildfire through the business community. Clients and colleagues alike turned their backs on him, horrified by the extent of his deceit. Samantha, unable to bear the weight of the scandal, packed her bags and left, disappearing without a trace. Calvin was left to face the consequences of his actions alone, his once powerful empire reduced to ashes. And through it all, I watched from the sidelines, a sense of vindication washing over me. Calvin had thought he could break me, but in the end, his own arrogance and greed had been his undoing. As I held my children close, their innocent laughter filling the air, I knew that I had won the greatest victory of all, the ability to provide them with a safe, loving home, free from the toxic influence of their father. Calvin's collapse was a harsh lesson in karma, a reminder that no matter how powerful or invincible one might seem, the truth always has a way of catching up. And as I looked towards the future, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and possibility, knowing that I had emerged from the ashes of my past, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The sharp ring of my phone cut through the peaceful silence of the evening. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my heart sink. It was Derek. "Hello?" I answered, a sense of dread settling in the pit of my stomach. "Miranda, you need to turn on the news. Right now." Derek's voice was laced with urgency, sending a chill down my spine. Without a word, I grabbed the remote and switched on the television, my breath catching in my throat as the headline flashed across the screen, "Local businessmen embroiled in fraud scandal." And there, larger than life, was Calvin's face, his expression a mixture of defiance and barely concealed panic as he was swarmed by a pack of ravenous reporters. "Mr. Archer, is it true that you've been embezzling funds from your company?" one of them shouted, thrusting a microphone in his face. Calvin recoiled, his jaw clenched tight. "No comment," he growled, pushing his way through the throng. But the reporters were relentless, their questions growing more pointed and accusatory with each passing second. "What about the allegations of insider trading? Can you confirm or deny your involvement? How do you respond to the claims that you've been bribing government officials to secure lucrative contracts?" Calvin's face contorted with rage, his mask of composure slipping as the weight of the accusations bore down on him. "Get those cameras out of my face!" he snarled, lashing out at the nearest reporter. The scene descended into chaos, a flurry of shouting and jostling bodies as Calvin fought to escape the relentless onslaught of questions and accusations. I watched in stunned silence, my heart pounding in my chest as the reality of what was unfolding hit me. This was it, the final nail in the coffin of Calvin's once pristine reputation. As the news coverage shifted to a panel of analysts dissecting the scandal and speculating about the potential legal ramifications, I felt a surge of vindication coursing through my veins. Calvin had brought this upon himself, and now the world was bearing witness to the true depths of his depravity. The phone buzzed in my hand, snapping me out of my trance. It was Derek again. "Did you see it?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "I saw it," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's really happening, isn't it?" Derek let out a long exhale. "Yes, it is, and there's no turning back now." A heavy silence hung between us, the weight of the situation settling like a thick fog. "Are you okay?" Derek asked, his voice softening with concern. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'm okay," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "This is what we wanted, isn't it? For him to face the consequences of his actions." "Yes, but that doesn't make it any easier," Derek said gently. "You're allowed to feel conflicted, Miranda. This is a lot to process." I swallowed hard, my gaze drifting to the twin cribs in the corner of the room, where my precious babies slept peacefully, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around them. "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I have to stay strong. For them. They deserve a life free from the toxic legacy their father has left behind." Derek was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was laced with a quiet pride. "You're an incredible woman, Miranda Archer. Never forget that." As I ended the call and set the phone aside, I couldn't help but reflect on the long and arduous journey that had led me to this moment. Calvin's public disgrace was the final blow, the culmination of his own selfish actions and misdeeds. And yet, as I watched the news footage replaying in an endless loop, I felt no sense of triumph or satisfaction, only a profound sadness for the man he had become, and a fierce determination to ensure that my children would never bear the scars of his misguided choices. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Calvin's reign of terror was over, and it was time for me to step into the light, embracing the future with open arms and a heart full of hope. The soft glow of birthday candles flickered across the faces of my loved ones, their smiles warm and radiant as they gathered around the twins' cake. It was hard to believe that an entire year had passed since that fateful day in the hospital, the day my world had been shattered by Calvin's betrayal. But as I looked around the room, surrounded by the people who had stood by me through the darkest of times, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude and hope. Evan, his eyes shining with pride, beamed at me from across the table, his unwavering support a constant source of strength. And beside him sat Derek, his hand resting comfortingly on my arm, a silent reminder that I was no longer alone. The twins giggled and clapped their hands, oblivious to the tumultuous journey that had brought us to this moment. For them, this was simply a day of celebration, a chance to revel in the unconditional love that surrounded them. As the birthday song faded into a chorus of cheers and laughter, I couldn't help but reflect on the long and winding road that had led me here. The pain and heartache of Calvin's betrayal, the fear and uncertainty that had threatened to consume me, all of it had been a crucible, forging me into a stronger, more resilient version of myself. No longer was I the meek, downtrodden woman who had cowered in the shadow of her husband's cruelty. I was a survivor, a warrior, who had stared down the demons of my past and emerged victorious. "Blow out the candles, Mommy," one of the twins exclaimed, their tiny voice cutting through my reverie. I smiled, leaning down to press a kiss to each of their foreheads, before taking a deep breath and extinguishing the flickering flames with a single, decisive puff. A chorus of cheers erupted around the table, and I felt a warmth bloom in my chest that had nothing to do with the candles. This was my life now, a life filled with love, laughter, and the promise of endless possibilities. As the party wound down and our guests began to trickle out, Derek lingered behind, his gaze soft and affectionate as he watched me tidy up. "You've come so far, Miranda," he said, his voice laced with pride. "I can't even begin to tell you how amazed I am by your strength." I paused, turning to face him with a grateful smile. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. You were the one who helped me find my way back when I thought I was lost forever." Derek shook his head, his eyes shining with a quiet intensity. "You found your own way," he said, taking a step closer. "I was just lucky enough to walk beside you." Our gazes locked, and in that moment the air seemed to crackle with a charged energy, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged between us through fire and adversity. Before I could second-guess myself, I closed the distance between us, my lips finding his in a tentative, exploratory kiss. Derek froze for a heartbeat before melting into the embrace, his arms wrapping around me with a tenderness that threatened to undo me. When we finally broke apart, breathless and flushed, I couldn't help but let out a tremulous laugh. "I never thought I'd find happiness again," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. Derek cupped my face in his calloused hands, his eyes shining with a fierce determination. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Miranda, and I'll spend every day making sure you get it." As he pulled me into another searing kiss, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future untainted by the ghosts of my past. Calvin's shadow no longer loomed over me, for I had stepped into the light, embracing the strength and resilience that had been forged in the fires of adversity. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't fear the unknown. With my children by my side and the love of a good man to guide me, I knew that I could conquer any obstacle that dared to cross my path. This was my life, my story, and I was the author of my own destiny.
My name is Emma. I'm 28 years old, living in Chicago. Growing up, I didn't have the typical childhood. I lost my parents when I was just a little girl in a car accident. I remember very little about them, only flashes of happiness before everything changed. The rest of my early years were spent in an orphanage, then foster homes. For most of my life, I wondered what it would have been like to have a family, people who cared about me, people who would love me unconditionally. But all that changed when I was adopted. My adoptive parents, Martha and Thomas, were wealthy, well known in the city for their philanthropic work. They never made a big deal about the adoption, keeping it quiet so the public wouldn't know. As a child, I never quite understood why they kept everything so hush-hush. But as I grew older, I realized it was to protect their image and their privacy. They loved me, of course, but there was always a certain distance between us, something I could never fully explain. I lived a life of luxury, but it was often isolating. I learned early on to stay out of the spotlight, to be grateful for the life I had without asking too many questions. When I turned 22, everything changed again. I was at university when I met Ethan. He was 30 at the time, a businessman from a prominent family. His family was even wealthier than mine, and they had a name that carried weight. Ethan was charming, genuine, and most importantly, kind. I'd never met anyone like him. We quickly became inseparable. His smile could light up a room, and his words always made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered. Our relationship blossomed. We graduated together, and soon after, Ethan proposed. Everything seemed perfect. But there was one problem: Ethan's parents. They didn't like me. From the moment they met me, they made it clear that I wasn't their idea of the right match for their son. They had expectations of wealth, status, and lineage. I wasn't from their world, and they made sure I knew it. I remember the first time I met them like it was yesterday. Ethan had warned me, "They're going to be hard on you, Emma. They have high standards. But just be yourself, and I'll be with you every step of the way." I was nervous, of course. Who wouldn't be? His parents were the kind of people who threw lavish parties and hosted grand events. I, on the other hand, came from a background where a nice dinner out was a treat. But I tried to put my worries aside. After all, Ethan was by my side. He was always there for me, reassuring me that nothing else mattered except what we had between us. The first meeting didn't go as smoothly as I hoped. Ethan's mother, Margaret, greeted me with a cold smile, while his father, Richard, barely acknowledged my presence. I tried to make polite conversation, but it was clear that they weren't interested in getting to know me. Their eyes gave me the feeling that I wasn't welcome, and no matter how much I tried to fit in, I just couldn't shake the feeling that they were judging me. Ethan noticed, of course. He always did. After the dinner, we got into an argument. "Emma, they're just trying to figure you out. They'll come around," he assured me, though his voice had a nervous edge to it. But I knew that no matter what, I would always be an outsider in their eyes. I was from the wrong world. Still, we pressed on. Ethan and I got engaged, deciding that our love was worth fighting for. Despite his family's disapproval, we eloped. We didn't tell anyone at first. We wanted to keep it private, between just the two of us. But as time went on, it became harder to ignore the tension. Ethan and I had a perfect life in many ways, but it wasn't enough to silence the undercurrent of his family's judgment. One day, his parents invited us to a special dinner. Ethan mentioned that a very important guest was coming, someone he referred to as a business associate. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of another dinner with his parents, but I agreed to go. After all, I wanted to make a good impression. I was still trying to earn their approval, even though deep down, I knew it was probably a lost cause. Little did I know that dinner would change everything. Ethan and I arrived at his parents' home that evening. The house was grand as always, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. The table was set perfectly, with expensive china and crystal glasses. The guest of honor had yet to arrive, but I could sense the tension in the air. Ethan seemed a little more anxious than usual, and I couldn't help but wonder if this guest was someone even more important than I had imagined. We sat down, waiting for the meal to begin. I tried to engage in small talk with Ethan's parents, but their responses were cold, almost like they were doing this out of obligation. Then the doorbell rang. Margaret quickly stood up. "That must be him," she said briskly. As she opened the door, a man entered the room, tall, with sharp features and a commanding presence. He looked around the room, and for a moment, his eyes locked with mine. He froze. The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. Margaret and Richard seemed to tense up, and I felt my heart race. Something was off. The man, who I now realized was the business associate, stepped closer. He looked at me again, his eyes wide with disbelief. My breath caught in my throat. He slowly walked toward me, his gaze fixed on my face. "No, it can't be," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, to my shock, he pointed at my cheek. "You have the mole," he said, his voice filled with awe. "It's you, it's really you." I stared at him, confused. What was he talking about? My hand instinctively touched the mole on my cheek, something I had never thought twice about before. I looked at Ethan, but he seemed just as stunned as I was. The man stepped closer, his voice trembling now. My daughter was kidnapped years ago. You're her?" The room went silent. Everyone's eyes were on me. I could feel my pulse racing, my thoughts spinning. What was happening? Was this a joke? Who was this man, and why was he saying such outrageous things? Was this even possible? The man continued, his eyes never leaving me. "I've been searching for you for years, and I never stopped. You're the one. The mole on your cheek, it's the key. You're my daughter." "I know it." I didn't know how to respond. My mind was swirling. How could this be real? How could I be this man's daughter? I had no memory of any of it. The man turned to Ethan's parents. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me know she was here?" he demanded. Richard and Margaret exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ethan stood there, his mouth agape, unable to say anything. And in that moment, everything shifted. The room was dead silent. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest as I stood there, frozen. This man, who had just walked into the room like any other guest, was now claiming to be my father. I glanced at Ethan, who was still in shock, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. His parents, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable, their usual cold composure now faltering. It was like the world around me had stopped spinning, and I was stuck in a moment that didn't make sense. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, my voice shaky. I don't remember anything about being kidnapped." The man, whose name I still didn't know, took another step toward me. "I understand. It's a lot to take in, but I've spent years searching for you. I'm Nathaniel Crane. Your real father." My mind was reeling. Nathaniel Crane? That name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. I looked over at Ethan, my eyes searching for some kind of answer. But he was just as lost as I was. His parents remained quiet, and I could see the uncomfortable tension in their eyes. Ethan, can you explain this? What is going on? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Ethan stepped forward, still clearly processing the situation. He glanced at his parents, then back at me. Emma, I didn't know. I had no idea. Nathaniel gave a small, regretful shake of his head. I didn't expect you to. This isn't something you were ever meant to be involved in. I've kept this from everyone until now. I felt the weight of his words, like they were sinking into me. My real father had been searching for me, and somehow, I had ended up in Ethan's life, living a completely different reality. My head was spinning. I had no memories of being kidnapped or of any other life outside of the one I knew with Martha and Thomas. My life had always seemed like a dream, a perfect picture. And now, everything was falling apart. You have to understand, Nathaniel continued, his voice calmer now. You were taken when you were just a little girl. I've never stopped looking for you, Emma. Your mother and I. He hesitated, his eyes darkening with sadness. We never gave up hope. I could feel my stomach churn. Was this really happening? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? My whole life, I had been told that my parents died in a car crash. But now this man was telling me I had been kidnapped. And as if that wasn't enough, he was insisting that I was his daughter. Margaret spoke up for the first time since Nathaniel's revelation. Nathaniel, this is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice tense. We don't know who you are. And for you to come here, claiming to be her father, this is not the time or the place. Nathaniel's eyes shifted from Margaret to Richard, and the room grew colder. I don't care about your feelings, Margaret. This is about Emma. She deserves to know the truth, and she deserves to know who she really is. I felt a mix of anger and confusion bubbling up inside of me. How could my parents, Martha and Thomas, never have told me any of this? Why had they kept it hidden? And why was Ethan's family suddenly acting like this was all just some inconvenient interruption in their perfect world? Ethan stepped forward, his voice barely audible. Emma, I'm so sorry. I never knew anything about this. I swear, if I had known. I couldn't look at him. My mind was too overwhelmed. I had always thought that Ethan and I were building a life together, but now it felt like I didn't know who he was either. How could I trust him when everything about my past was suddenly in question? Nathaniel looked at me again, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sadness. Emma, I know this is overwhelming, but please just listen. I've spent years looking for you. You're my daughter, and I want to make sure you have everything you deserve. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my brain. How can I even believe you? I asked, my voice breaking. How can I trust anything you say when everything I thought I knew about myself is wrong? Ethan reached out to me, his voice soft. Emma, please. I don't know what to say. I'm just as lost in this as you are. But we'll figure it out. We can take this slow, together. But I couldn't. The words didn't make sense. I couldn't just go along with this. I needed answers, and I needed time. This man couldn't just waltz into my life and claim to be my father. I needed proof. I needed to understand why all of this was happening. Nathaniel seemed to sense my doubt. He took a step back, giving me some space. I understand, Emma. I don't expect you to trust me right away. But please, just know that I've never stopped looking for you. I'll give you all the time you need. The silence in the room was suffocating. I looked at Ethan, then at his parents. I could see the tension in their faces, the way they were trying to mask their discomfort. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know who I could trust anymore. This is too much, I finally whispered, more to myself than anyone else. I needed time. I needed to think. I need to go home. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but I shook my head. No, I need to be alone. I grabbed my coat and headed toward the door. Ethan followed, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I was too overwhelmed. My entire life was a lie, and I had no idea where to go from here. As I stepped outside into the cold Chicago air, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The night felt darker than ever, and I couldn't help but wonder how everything would change from this moment forward. The cold wind hit my face as I stepped out into the dark Chicago night, and I felt my chest tighten with every breath. My mind was still racing, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get away from it all. I needed space to think, to breathe, away from the people who seemed to have every answer except the one I needed the most. Who am I really? I walked aimlessly through the streets, the city lights blurring around me. I had to process what Nathaniel had said, what he claimed was true. My whole life was a lie. Or at least it felt like it was. Was I really his daughter? How could I have been kidnapped, and why was I only finding out now? The more I tried to think it through, the more questions piled up, and the less clear everything became. As I wandered, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Ethan. "Emma, please let me explain. I'm worried about you. Please come home." I stopped in my tracks, staring at the message. I could feel my anger building again. Why did he think he had the right to ask me to come home? What did he think would change if I just returned to that house, where everything had been turned upside down? He had no idea how much this hurt. How much everything had been ripped from me in one night. I ignored the message and kept walking. Ethan's words still echoed in my mind. "We'll figure it out, together." It was a lie. How could we figure it out when everything I thought I knew about myself was now uncertain? How could I trust him when he had never even questioned the perfect world his parents had created for him? Eventually, I ended up at a quiet park by the lake, a place I used to go to when I needed peace. The city's noise felt miles away here. I sat on a bench, looking out at the water. The world felt distant, and I felt smaller than ever. A part of me wanted to believe Nathaniel, to believe that he really was my father. After all, if what he said was true, then it meant I wasn't just some orphan lost to the world. But the other part of me, the one that had grown up with Martha and Thomas, couldn't accept it. I had been happy with my life, or at least I thought I was. But now, everything felt like it was slipping away. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the recent messages. I saw texts from Martha and Thomas. "Are you okay, Emma? We're worried about you." They must have known about what happened at the dinner. I hadn't spoken to them in hours, and I couldn't bring myself to call them. Not yet. They were the ones who raised me, the ones I'd always known as my parents. But now, they seemed like strangers too. How could they have kept something so important from me? Another message from Ethan came through. "I'll give you space, but I can't let you face this alone." I sighed. I didn't want him to be part of this, not right now. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep running forever. I had to face this, whatever it was. I had to find out the truth. I stayed in the park for a while longer, letting my mind slowly settle. I had always prided myself on being independent, on handling things on my own. But this was too much. It was too big. I needed help. And no matter how much it stung, I knew I had to reach out to the only people who had always been there for me, Martha and Thomas. I called them. "Emma, sweetheart, are you okay?" Martha's voice was gentle, but filled with concern.
"I don't know, Mom. I
don't know what's real anymore." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I don't know what you're talking about, Emma. Please tell me what happened." And I did. I told her everything about Nathaniel, the man who claimed to be my real father, the kidnapping, the mole on my cheek. I told her how I felt like my entire life had been one big lie. I told her about Ethan's parents, about the dinner, about how everything had come crashing down so quickly. Martha listened quietly, her voice calm but full of sadness, when she finally spoke. "Emma, I wish we could have told you earlier. I wanted to, but we never thought it was the right time. Your father and I didn't know how to explain everything to you. We didn't want to hurt you. Did you know about this?" I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. "Did you know about Nathaniel? About my real families?" There was another long pause, and I could almost hear the hesitation in her voice. "Yes, Emma, we knew. We found you when you were just a baby, and Nathaniel had been searching for you ever since. We didn't want to tell you because we were afraid of what it might do to you, to our family. But we've always loved you, and we always will. You are our daughter." I could feel the weight of her words press down on me, but they didn't give me the clarity I was hoping for. How could they have kept this from me? How could they have let me grow up thinking I was an orphan, only to find out that I wasn't? I don't know what to do, Mom, I whispered. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore. She took a deep breath. Emma, I know this is hard. I can't imagine what you're going through. But you don't have to go through it alone. We're here for you, and we always will be. Do you think I should meet Nathaniel? I asked, the question hanging in the air between us. Martha hesitated. That's something only you can decide, sweetheart. But whatever you choose, know that you are loved. And you always have been. I hung up the phone, feeling both comforted and more lost than ever. My life was split between two worlds, neither of which seemed to fit anymore. Nathaniel, my biological father, had found me. But what did that even mean? Could I just turn my back on everything I had known? The questions were endless, and the answers were still out of reach. As I made my way back home, I realized one thing. I couldn't ignore this any longer. I had to face whatever was waiting for me.
But how?
And where did Ethan fit into all of this? I didn't have the answers. But I knew one thing. The hardest part of this journey was only just beginning. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions, tried to live my life, but nothing felt normal. Everything felt like it had shifted, like I was standing on unstable ground, unsure of where I was going or who I was anymore. I barely slept, barely ate. My mind was consumed by questions, by Nathaniel, by Ethan, by Martha and Thomas. It all felt like a tangled mess I couldn't unravel. Ethan kept calling, texting, asking to meet. But I didn't know what to say to him. How could I look him in the eye after everything that had happened? After learning that his family, who I had been trying so hard to impress, had known nothing about my past? I was caught between my loyalty to Ethan, the man I had loved, and the shocking truth about my real identity. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of trying to block out the noise of my thoughts, I found myself standing in front of the mirror in my apartment. My hand rested on the mole on my cheek, the one that had been the key to unlocking this entire storm of chaos. I stared at my reflection, trying to make sense of it all. Was I Emma Crane, the daughter of a wealthy billionaire who had spent years searching for me? Or was I still Emma, the girl raised by Martha and Thomas, who had known nothing but love from them?
My phone buzzed again.
It was a text from Ethan. Please, Emma, can we just talk? I didn't respond right away. I didn't even know if I wanted to. But the truth was, I missed him. I missed the life we had before all of this. I missed the certainty of our love, the simplicity of it. I didn't want to face the reality that everything had changed, but I couldn't hide from it forever. So I called him. Emma? His voice was tentative, hesitant. I could hear the relief in his tone when he heard my voice. I've been trying to get a hold of you. I just want to know you're okay. I need to explain everything. I closed my eyes for a moment, collecting my thoughts. Ethan, I don't even know where to begin. I don't know if I can keep doing this. This whole situation, it's too much. I know, he said softly. I never meant for any of this to happen. I should have been there for you when you needed me the most, but I didn't understand. I didn't know what you were going through. Please, Emma, just give me a chance to make it right. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. I need to figure this out on my own, Ethan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can keep being with you when everything feels so uncertain. There was a long silence before he spoke again. I understand. But if you need space, I'll give it to you. I just want you to be happy. The pain in his voice hit me hard, but it didn't change anything. I wasn't sure what happiness looked like anymore. I wasn't sure who I was or what I wanted. I'm sorry, Ethan, I said, my throat tightening. I need time. I need to figure out what I'm supposed to do next. I ended the call and sat in silence for a long time. I thought about what I had learned about Nathaniel and what he had said. He wasn't just some stranger claiming to be my father. He had proof. He had been searching for me. But even with all that, there was a part of me that still didn't know if I could accept him into my life. The life I had known, The family that raised me had always felt real, and no matter how many times I told myself to embrace the truth, I wasn't sure I could leave everything behind. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind still heavy with indecision. I took a deep breath, then dialed Nathaniel's number. My fingers trembled slightly as I waited for him to pick up. "Emma?" His voice was warm, relieved. "I'm so glad you called. I need to meet you," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I had intended.
I
need answers. I can't keep living in the dark. I need to know the truth." "I understand," he said, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. "I'm here, Emma. Whenever you're ready." We agreed to meet later that afternoon. As I walked to the cafe where we were supposed to meet, my heart pounded in my chest. The decision I was about to make was huge. Was I ready to accept this new life, to leave behind the only family I had ever known? Or was I going to turn my back on everything I thought was real and step into a world that was unfamiliar, a world where my real father awaited me? When I arrived, Nathaniel was already there, waiting at a corner table. He stood up as soon as he saw me, his face filled with hope. I could see the same desperation in his eyes, the same need for answers that I felt. I sat down across from him, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. There was so much left unsaid, so much I needed to understand. "Emma," he began softly, "I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know that I'm not here to force anything on you. I've spent my whole life searching for you, but I'll understand if you need more time. I just want you to know that I'm here for you. You're not alone." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. But deep down, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep living in the past, caught between two worlds. It was time to make a choice. "Thank you for finding me," I said, my voice trembling. "But I have a life here. A family, people who raised me. I can't just turn my back on them." Nathaniel nodded, his eyes sad but understanding. "I don't want you to choose between us, Emma. I only want you to have the chance to know the truth, to know who you really are. And whatever you decide, I'll support you." I looked at him one last time, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of clarity. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what my future held. But I knew one thing. The journey of self-discovery had only just begun. And whatever came next, I would face it head-on. I stood up from the table, taking one last look at Nathaniel. "Thank you," I whispered. I left the cafe and walked into the uncertain future, ready to face whatever came next.
I found it in his jacket pocket while doing laundry. A photograph, glossy and warm from the dryer, showing my husband Luke pressed close to a woman I'd never seen before. Her red dress matched her lipstick, and his hand rested on the small of her back like it belonged there. "My name is Kate, and until 30 seconds ago, I thought I had a perfect marriage." The laundry basket dropped from my hands, clean clothes scattering across our bedroom floor. My fingers trembled as I lifted the photo closer, studying every detail, the intimacy in their posture, the way they leaned into each other. The genuine smile on Luke's face that I hadn't seen in months. "Honey, did you wash my blue tie?" Luke's voice floated up from downstairs. I shoved the photo back into his pocket, my heart hammering. Still in the dryer, I called back, proud of how steady my voice sounded. The jacket carried an unfamiliar scent, something floral and expensive that definitely wasn't mine. "Found it." He appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work in crisp slacks and a white shirt. "What happened here?" "Dropped the basket." I started gathering clothes, keeping my eyes down. "That work event last week, the one you went to alone, were there photographers there?" He paused, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Just the usual corporate stuff." "Why?" "No reason. Just curious." I folded a towel with mechanical precision, watching his reflection. 7 years together, and I'd never noticed how easily lies fell from his lips. "Don't forget dinner at Mom's tonight," he said, grabbing his jacket. "She's making that pasta you love." "Linda." My mother-in-law would be devastated. She'd welcomed me into the family like the daughter she never had, and now I'd have to sit across from her, pretending everything was fine while her son's infidelity burned a hole in my pocket. Right. Dinner. I forced a smile. Wouldn't miss it. Luke kissed my cheek, and I fought the urge to wipe it away. The familiar scent of his cologne mixed with that strange perfume, making my stomach turn. "Love you," he said, already heading for the door. "Love you too." The words tasted like ash. After he left, I pulled out my phone and texted Emily, "Need you. Emergency wine night." Her response came instantly, "On my way. Bringing the good stuff." I sat on the bed, surrounded by scattered laundry, and pulled out the photo again. The woman was beautiful in that polished, corporate way, sleek hair, perfect makeup, confident smile. My fingers traced the edge of the image, catching on a tiny notation in the corner, "Rachel and Luke, Project Celebration." Rachel. Now I had a name. My phone buzzed with another text from Emily, "Should I bring ice cream too?" "Yes," I replied. "And maybe a lawyer." I tucked the photo into my bedside drawer and started getting ready for what would undoubtedly be the most excruciating family dinner of my life. Part of me wanted to scream, to call Luke and demand answers, to throw his perfectly pressed suits onto the front lawn. But something deeper, colder, was taking root. The judge's daughter in me, thanks, Dad, knew better than to show my hand too early. If Luke wanted to play games, he'd learn that I could play them too. And I played to win. The perfume bottle would be easy enough to find in his office. The emails would follow. Then the credit card statements. By the time I was done, I'd have enough evidence to bury him. I picked up his jacket again, inhaling that foreign scent. "Game on, darling," I whispered, already planning my next move. Game on. Linda's dining room smells like garlic and childhood memories. I watch Luke help his mother carry dishes to the table, playing the role of devoted son while my stomach churns with every casual lie he tells. "Katie, sweetheart, you've barely touched your wine." Linda reaches across the table, her fingers brushing my hand. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired." I force a smile, but my fingers tighten around the stem of my glass. End of semester stuff at school. Luke settles into his chair, loosening his tie. "You work too hard, babe. Maybe you should take some time off." The concern in his voice makes me want to scream. Instead, I take a deliberate sip of wine. "Actually, I've been thinking about picking up some extra classes. Summer school. But what about our trip?" He frowns, a fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "We talked about going to the coast." "Did we?" I meet his eyes. Must have slipped my mind. Like that work event last week, the one with the photographer. A muscle twitches in his jaw. "Mom, this pasta is incredible. New recipe." Linda beams, launching into a story about her cooking class, while I watch Luke's shoulders relax. He thinks he's dodged the bullet. Poor, naive Luke. Oh. Before I forget, Linda jumps up, hurrying to the kitchen. "I found something while cleaning out the attic." She returns with a dusty photo album, and my heart sinks. "Not now. Not tonight. Your wedding photos." She places it between us, flipping pages with reverent fingers. "Look how beautiful you were, Katie. And Luke, so handsome in that suit." The images mock me, white dress, perfect smile, sacred vows. My phone buzzes in my pocket, Emily, probably checking in. I ignore it. Remember our first dance? Luke's hand finds mine on the table. I don't pull away. How could I forget? "You stepped on my dress 3 times. 4, Linda corrects, laughing. "But you were both so happy, it didn't matter. A new photo slides from between the pages, Luke as a teenager, arms around a pretty brunette. Linda snatches it up quickly, but not before I notice the girl's striking resemblance to Rachel. "Who's that?" The words escape before I can stop them. "Nobody," Luke says sharply. At the same moment Linda murmurs, "Sarah Mitchell." The tension crackles. Luke stands abruptly, gathering plates. "Mom, let me help with cleanup." Sarah was Luke's first serious girlfriend, Linda continues, ignoring her son's warning look. "Such a sweet girl. They dated all through high school until—" "Mom." Luke's voice could freeze hell. "Until what?" I press, watching Luke's knuckles whiten around the plate he's holding. Linda's eyes dart between us. "Until she moved away for college." Luke was devastated. "Ancient history," Luke mutters, disappearing into the kitchen. I lean closer to Linda. Did she look anything like Rachel from the architecture firm? The color drains from Linda's face. "How do you know about Rachel?" Before I can respond, Luke returns. Linda busies herself with the photo album, but her hands shake slightly. "Ready to head home?" Luke asks too brightly. "Early meeting tomorrow." Actually, I stand slowly. I thought I might stay and help Linda clean up. "Girl talk." His smile falters. "You sure?" "It's getting late." "Positive." I kiss his cheek, breathing in that familiar cologne. No trace of perfume tonight. "Take the car." "I'll grab an Uber." After he leaves, Linda pours more wine with trembling hands. "Katie, about Rachel. How long have you known?" She sinks into her chair. "I saw them together last month, at that new cafe downtown. Luke said it was just work, but—" She twists her wedding ring, a nervous habit I've never noticed before. I've seen that look before. On his father's face. The pieces click into place, Linda's quiet acceptance of her ex-husband's absence, her overprotectiveness of Luke. Her endless attempts to make me feel like family. History repeats itself, I murmur, reaching for my phone. Emily's text glows on the screen, "Found something. Call me ASAP." "Not always," Linda says softly. "Sometimes we can break the cycle." I look at my mother-in-law, really look at her, and see something new in her eyes. Not just sympathy, but solidarity. "Yes," I reply, already planning my next move. "Sometimes we can." Emily's text led me to Bellini's, the kind of overpriced Italian restaurant where deals are made over $100 bottles of wine. I'm parked across the street, watching Luke's silver Audi pull into the lot right on schedule. His important client meeting excuse still rings in my ears. My hands grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turn white. Because there she is, Rachel Parker, stepping out of her own car, smoothing that red dress that matches her lipstick perfectly. Just like in the photograph. "Got you," I whisper, reaching for my phone to record. But my fingers freeze when I see who else exits Rachel's car, Linda. My mother-in-law's presence hits me like a physical blow. She hugs Rachel, laughing at something Luke says as they walk inside together. The betrayal doubles, triples, becomes something monstrous. My phone buzzes. "Emily, status update." I can't type fast enough, Linda's here. "With them." She lied to me. The response is immediate, "Holy shit. Want backup?" Before I can reply, another car pulls into the lot, a familiar black Mercedes. My father's car. James Miller, retired judge and perpetual disappointment in my life choices, steps out adjusting his tie. "What the hell?" The words escape in a strangled whisper. I abandon the car, my heels clicking against pavement as I cross the street. Through Bellini's front window, I can see them all being seated at a round table, Luke, Rachel, Linda, and now my father. Looking more animated than I've seen him in years. The hostess smiles as I enter. Table for one. No. My voice sounds distant, hollow. I see my party. I walk toward them in slow motion, watching their faces change as they notice me. Luke goes pale. Rachel's hand jerks away from his arm. Linda's wine glass freezes halfway to her lips. Only my father looks unsurprised. Katie, he says calmly. Right on time. Time for what? The words come out sharp enough to cut. Sweetheart, Luke stands, reaching for me. This isn't. Sit down, Lucas. My father's voice carries the weight of 30 years on the bench. Luke sits. Catherine, please join us. There are things you need to hear. I've heard enough lies. But I sit anyway, because that's what good daughters do. The waiter appears with water and menus. No one touches them. Your mother wore that same expression, my father says quietly, the day she discovered I wasn't who she thought I was. The pieces start falling into place, Linda's knowing looks, the Sarah Mitchell story, my father's sudden appearance. You're not just Luke's co-worker, I say to Rachel. You're Sarah Mitchell's daughter. Rachel nods slowly. I needed answers about my mother. About why she really left. Luke was helping me. By sleeping with you. The words taste like poison. No, Linda interrupts. By trying to prevent the same mistakes. The same patterns. She looks at my father. Tell her, James. Tell her everything. My father sighs, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just Luke's high school girlfriend. She was my legal clerk. And when your mother found out about our affair. Stop. The word comes out like a gunshot. Just stop. Luke reaches for my hand. I yank it away. Kate, please. When Rachel came to the firm, when I realized who she was, I couldn't just. You could have told me the truth. My voice doesn't shake. I'm proud of that. Any of you. All of you. We were trying to protect you, Linda says softly. No. I stand, my chair scraping against the floor. You were protecting yourselves. Your secrets. Your lies. I look at each of them in turn, my faithless husband, his mother who chose loyalty to lies over truth, my father who never changed. And Rachel, the living proof of all their deceptions. Kate, Luke starts. I'll be sending divorce papers to your office. I turn to my father. And I'll be calling Mother tonight. She deserves to know everything too. I walk away from their table, their excuses, their tangled web of lies. My phone buzzes again. Emily, need extraction. Yes, I type back. And bring a lawyer. It's time to burn it all down. Behind me, I hear chairs scraping, voices rising, but I don't look back. Some fires need to spread before they can cleanse. Rachel's office is exactly what I expected. All glass and chrome, with a view of the city that probably costs more than my yearly salary. She doesn't look surprised to see me standing in her doorway. I wondered when you'd show up. She gestures to the chair across from her desk. Close the door. I remain standing. Tell me something, Rachel. Was seducing Luke part of your original plan, or just a bonus while digging up dirt on my father? Interesting assumption. She leans back, crossing her legs. That I seduced him. That this was all my idea. Wasn't it? Your father ruined my mother's life. Luke. She pauses, touching a silver frame on her desk. I recognize the woman in the photo, Sarah Mitchell, 20 years younger than the image burned in my memory from Linda's album. Luke was supposed to help me understand why. By sleeping with you. By showing me that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Her smile is razor sharp. Did you know he came to me? After finding out who I was. He said he wanted to protect you from the truth about James. My laugh sounds hollow. By having an affair. Brilliant logic. No. She opens her desk drawer, pulls out a thick manila envelope. By helping me gather evidence. Your father's pattern of affairs didn't stop with my mother, Kate. There were others. Many others. The envelope lands between us with a dull thud. Luke was going to tell you everything. After we had enough proof. She taps the envelope. Then things got complicated. You fell for him. He fell for me. Her composure cracks, just slightly. Or maybe he just fell for the idea of being someone's hero instead of another Miller family disappointment. My phone buzzes, Emily, probably with updates from the lawyer. I ignore it. Why tell me this now? Because you deserve to know that Luke's betrayal started with trying to protect you. She stands, moves to the window. Ironic, isn't it? How the road to hell is paved with family loyalty. Where is he now? After your scene at Bellini's. Probably drinking himself stupid at the Metropolitan. She turns back to me. He's there most nights lately. Drowning his guilt, I suppose. And my father. James Miller is currently boarding a flight to Singapore. Business trip, officially. Her smile returns, colder now. Running away, actually. Just like he taught Luke to do. I pick up the envelope. It's heavy with secrets, with evidence of generational betrayal. What are you going to do with all this? Rachel asks. Why do you care? Because despite everything, I loved him. She returns to her desk, picks up her phone. And because I just sent copies of everything to your mother. The floor seems to tilt beneath my feet. You what? Sometimes the best revenge isn't the one we plan. She sits down, suddenly looking tired. It's the truth we've been running from all along. My phone buzzes again. This time I look, it's my mother. After 15 years of minimal contact, her name on my screen feels like an accusation. He'll lose everything, I say quietly. The reputation he spent decades building. His position on the ethics board. Everything. Yes. Rachel nods. Just like my mother lost everything. Just like you're losing everything. She pauses. Just like Luke will lose everything. I think of Linda. Probably sitting in her kitchen with her photo albums and her memories of 2 generations of Thompson men and their perfectly justified betrayals. Thank you, I say, turning to leave. For what? For showing me that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. I hold up the envelope. It's letting the truth do its own dirty work. As I walk out of her office, my phone buzzes a 3rd time. Luke, please come home. We need to talk. I text back, no, we don't. But I'm sure Rachel will listen. She's good at that. The elevator doors close on my reflection, a woman holding an envelope full of destruction, wearing a smile that would make Rachel proud. Sometimes the best revenge is simply stepping aside and letting karma take its course. I press the lobby button, already composing my message to Mother. It's time for all the Miller women to compare notes. The Metropolitan's dim lighting can't hide Luke's disheveled appearance. He's been here for hours, judging by the empty glasses in front of him. I slide onto the bar stool beside him, placing Rachel's envelope between us. Didn't expect to see you here, he slurs, not looking up. Didn't expect a lot of things, did we? I order a whiskey, neat. Like finding out our honeymoon villa in Bali was already booked. For you and Rachel. His hand trembles around his glass. How? Your work email password is still our wedding date. I take a slow sip. Amateur mistake. The bartender hovers nearby, sensing tension. Luke waves him away. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he says. No. How was it supposed to happen? My phone buzzes, another message from my mother, probably. I've been ignoring them all day. Were you going to tell me about my father's affairs before or after sleeping with Sarah Mitchell's daughter? He flinches. You don't understand. Actually, I do. I tap the envelope. Rachel explained everything. Your noble crusade to protect me from Daddy's sins. Very heroic. Kate. But here's what I don't understand. I turn to face him fully. The emails planning your romantic getaway. Those started before you knew who Rachel was. Before this whole revenge plot against my father. Color drains from his face. I can explain. The thing about being married to a liar, I cut him off, is that you get really good at spotting patterns. Like how you touch your wedding ring when you're about to lie. Or how you've been deleting texts every night before bed. He reaches for the envelope. I pull it back. Don't worry, these aren't the only copies. Rachel made sure of that. I finish my whiskey. She's quite thorough, your girlfriend. Must be why my father hired her at the firm in the first place. What? Luke straightens, suddenly more alert. James hired her. Now it's my turn to smile. Amateur mistake number 2, assuming you knew who was manipulating whom. My phone buzzes again. This time I look, it's Linda, he knows. James knows everything. Be careful. You should call Rachel, I say, standing. I think she has some explaining to do about who really orchestrated this little drama. Wait. Luke grabs my arm. Whatever you're planning. I'm not planning anything. I gently remove his hand. I'm just letting the truth do what it does best, destroy everything in its path. The bartender approaches as I turn to leave. Ma'am. Your husband's tab. Ex-husband, I correct him. And he can pay his own bills. Just like Rachel can pay hers. I pause. Though I hear the firm's expense account is quite generous. Right, Luke? Outside, the night air feels clean compared to the bar's stale atmosphere. My phone lights up with a text from Rachel, we need to talk. Your father isn't who you think he is. I type back, neither are you. But I'm learning. Another message from my mother appears, coming home tomorrow. We have much to discuss. The pieces are falling into place, but not in the way anyone expected. Not Luke, thinking he could play hero. Not Rachel, thinking she could use him for revenge. Not even my father, thinking he could control everything from behind the scenes. I flag down a taxi, giving the driver Linda's address. She deserves to know what's coming, how both our families are about to implode in ways none of us anticipated. My phone buzzes one final time. Emily, got the papers ready. Sure you want to do this? I think about the web of lies, the carefully orchestrated betrayals. The way everyone thought they were the puppet master when they were really just dancing on someone else's strings. Yes, I reply. Time to cut all the strings at once. The taxi pulls away from the Metropolitan just as Luke stumbles out, phone to his ear, probably calling Rachel. Let them scramble. Let them panic. The truth is already in motion, and not even my father can stop what's coming. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting free. Our first wedding anniversary dinner looks perfect from the outside. Crystal glasses catch the light, white roses fill the air with sweetness, and Luke beams at me from across the table at LeBlanc. Completely oblivious to what's coming. To us, he raises his glass. 1 year down, forever to go. I clink my glass against his, watching him drink. My own champagne remains untouched. Forever is such an interesting concept. Linda shifts in her seat beside me, her eyes darting between us. She knows something's wrong but can't quite piece it together. Good. Katie's right, my mother says, taking her seat. Her surprise appearance 10 minutes ago nearly made Luke choke on his appetizer. Forever is only as reliable as the people promising it. Luke's smile falters. Margaret, we weren't expecting. Clearly. She smooths her napkin, every inch the judge's scorned wife. But then, expectations can be so disappointing. Right, James? My father, at the head of the table, loosens his tie slightly. Perhaps this isn't the time. 8:15, I interrupt, checking my watch. Actually, it's exactly the time. The maitre d' approaches our table, Rachel following close behind. She's wearing red again, but her usual confidence seems shaken. I'm sorry, she says, not to Luke or me, but to my father. I couldn't. Sit down, Rachel. My mother's voice could freeze hell. Since you're so fond of Thompson men, you might as well join the anniversary celebration. Luke stands so quickly his chair nearly topples. Kate, what are you doing? Creating a teaching moment. I finally lift my champagne. About patterns. About karma. About how secrets have a way of coming full circle. Linda reaches for her son's arm. Luke, what's going on? Ask Rachel, I suggest. Or James. Or maybe start with why Sarah Mitchell's daughter just happens to work at Daddy's firm. The silence that follows feels like glass about to shatter. You don't understand, my father starts. Actually, I do. I pull out Rachel's envelope, now joined by a second one, thicker, older. Filled with 20 years of my mother's careful documentation. Mom explained everything. About Sarah. About the others. About how you orchestrated this whole thing with Rachel to keep Luke quiet about what he discovered. Rachel sinks into an empty chair. He promised. He promises a lot of things. My mother's smile is razor sharp. To love, to honor, to cherish. To keep secrets. To protect reputations. Luke looks like he might be sick. Linda, I can explain. Don't bother. Linda stands, her chair scraping against the floor. I've heard it all before. From your father. The maitre d' hovers uncertainly nearby. Other diners are starting to stare. A toast, I announce, rising. To patterns. To men who think they're protecting us while they're really protecting themselves. To women who keep their secrets. I lock eyes with Rachel. And to daughters who learn from their mother's mistakes. Katie, my father warns, think carefully about what you're doing. Oh, I have. I drop both envelopes on the table. Everything's already been sent to the ethics board. The divorce papers are filed. And Mom's book about her years as a judge's wife hits stores next month. Luke lunges for the envelopes, but Rachel beats him to them. She opens the older one, her hands shaking as she reads. You knew, she whispers to my father. You knew about my mother all along. This whole thing, hiring me, pushing me toward Luke, it was all to keep control of the narrative. The restaurant has gone quiet. Too quiet. Happy anniversary, I say softly, gathering my coat. The truth looks good on all of you. As I walk away, I hear chairs scraping, voices rising, accusations flying. My phone buzzes. Emily, cars waiting outside. You okay? No, I'm not okay. I'm numb. Empty. But sometimes you have to burn everything down to see what's really left standing. I step into the cool night air, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 families' worth of lies. Let them sort through the ashes. I've got my own phoenix to build. Behind me, someone calls my name. I don't turn around. Some endings don't need an audience. Emily's apartment feels like a war room. Scattered papers cover her coffee table, bank statements, emails, hotel receipts. My mother sits beside me, methodically highlighting documents while the news plays silently on TV. The doorbell rings. Emily checks her phone and nods. They're here. Luke and Rachel enter together, followed by my father. Linda slips and lashed, keeping her distance from everyone. Quite the performance at dinner, my father says, straightening his tie. Now can we discuss this reasonably? Reasonable. My mother's laugh is brittle. Like how you reasonably hired your ex-mistress's daughter to spy on your own family. Rachel flinches. That's not. Show them, I tell Emily. She pulls up an email on her laptop, turning it toward them. Luke's face drains of color as he reads. You were never supposed to find out, he whispers. Which part? I stand, forcing myself to stay steady. The affair. The conspiracy. Or how you and Rachel plan to expose my father's indiscretions while hiding your own. I loved you, Luke says. Everything I did was for yourself. Linda's voice cuts through the room. Just like your father. Just like James. You tell yourselves you're protecting someone, but you're really just protecting your own guilt. My father steps forward. Linda, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. She pulls out her phone, holding it up. Sarah's on video chat. Would you like to explain it to her? The screen shows a woman I recognize from old photos, older now, but still beautiful. Rachel makes a choked sound. Mom. Hello, sweetheart. Sarah's voice fills the room. James, you look exactly like I remembered. Still fixing everyone else's lives while destroying your own. Luke moves toward me. Kate, please. Don't. I back away. The ethics board has everything. Mom's book manuscript is with the publisher. It's over. Nothing's over, my father snaps. I can still. What? My mother stands. Bury it. Like you buried Sarah's career. Like you buried my self-respect. Like you buried Luke's affair to keep him quiet about your own sins. Rachel sinks onto Emily's couch. I never meant. I just wanted to know the truth about why you left, Mom. And now you do, Sarah says softly. The truth is, there are no heroes in this story. Just people too afraid to face their own reflections. Luke reaches for me again. This time I let him grab my arm. Watching his face as Emily plays the recording, his conversation with Rachel about using our honeymoon as cover for their getaway. I can explain, he starts. No need. I remove his hand. The explanation is right there, in black and white. Just like the evidence of every affair my father had. Just like the paper trail of hush money and threatened careers. The board meets tomorrow, Emily adds quietly. Everything's being reviewed. My father's composure finally cracks. Margaret, think about what this will do to our reputation. Our reputation. My mother laughs. There is no our anymore. There's just truth and consequences. And choices, Linda adds, moving to stand beside me. We all make them. We all live with them. Luke looks desperately between Rachel and me. I never meant to hurt anyone. Intention doesn't change impact, I say, echoing words my father once used in court. You taught me that, Dad. Remember? The room falls silent except for Sarah's quiet breathing through the phone. Rachel stares at her mother's image, tears streaming down her face. So what now? Luke asks. I look at each of them, my father, the righteous judge undone by his own hypocrisy, Luke. The devoted husband who became everything he claimed to hate, Rachel, the daughter seeking truth who buried herself in lies, Linda. The mother who saw history repeating itself, my mother, finally free from decades of silence. Now. I gather my coat. Now we all live with our choices. The truth is out. What happens next is up to you. I leave them there, surrounded by evidence of their own destruction. Emily follows me to the door. You okay? She whispers. I'm not. I might never be. But as I step into the night air, I feel lighter than I have in months. Sometimes winning isn't about revenge at all. Sometimes it's just about refusing to play the game anymore. The ethics board's decision arrives in a plain white envelope. I leave it unopened on Emily's kitchen counter while we pack the last of my things from Luke's house. Your mother's book hit the bestseller list, Emily says, taping another box. Luke's firm is in damage control mode. I fold another sweater, breathing in the lingering scent of our shared laundry detergent. And Rachel moved back home. Sarah got her a job at a different firm. Emily pauses. Linda called again. Of course she did. Linda's been leaving messages, each one more raw than the last. Like mother, like son, both trying to explain, to justify, to rewrite history. The doorbell rings. My father stands there, looking smaller somehow in his casual clothes. No more judge's robes to hide behind. The board's decision, he gestures at the envelope. Don't you want to know? Not really. I continue packing. The truth's already out there. The rest is just paperwork. He picks up a framed photo, my wedding day. Your mother's book is honest. I take the frame from him, wrapping it in newspaper. Something you might try sometime. I did what I thought was right. No. I meet his eyes. You did what was easy. Controlling the narrative, manipulating Rachel, using Luke's guilt to keep your own secrets. Easy. Emily slips out, giving us privacy. My father sinks onto her couch, suddenly looking every bit his age. When did you get so strong? He asks quietly. When I stopped trying to be what everyone else wanted. I sit across from him. When I realized revenge wasn't about hurting others, it was about refusing to let them hurt me anymore. The envelope sits between us, still sealed. Outside, a car door slams. Luke's voice drifts up, arguing with someone. Rachel, probably. They're both scrambling now, trying to salvage careers built on quicksand. I never meant, my father starts. To become the villain in Mom's story. To teach Luke that lies were acceptable as long as they were wrapped in good intentions. To make Rachel hate her own mother. I stand, gathering more books. Funny how our choices ripple outward, isn't it? He reaches for the envelope. I let him open it. Disbarred, he whispers. Effective immediately. Karma's not always subtle. I tape another box. Linda says hello, by the way. She and Mom are starting a support group. For women who've loved men like you. The irony almost makes me laugh, almost. My father leaves the decision letter on Emily's coffee table, next to the newspaper announcing my mother's book tour. Later, after he's gone, Emily helps me carry boxes to my new apartment. It's small, but it's mine. No memories, no ghosts, no lingering sense of betrayal. You never told me, she says, unpacking dishes. What was in that perfume bottle? The one that started all this. I pull it from my purse, Rachel's signature scent, now discontinued. Want to know something funny? It was empty the whole time. Just the glass bottle, no perfume. Like everything else in my marriage, all appearance, no substance. Emily takes it, turns it in the light. What are you going to do with it? Through the window, I can see Luke's car still parked outside. He's been sitting there for an hour, probably working up the courage to come up. Let him wait. I take the bottle back, feeling its familiar weight. Keep it. As a reminder that sometimes the smallest things, an empty perfume bottle, a photograph, a moment of truth, can change everything. And the others? Luke, Rachel, your dad. They'll live with their choices. I place the bottle on my new windowsill, where the setting sun catches it. Just like I'm living with mine. Below, Luke finally steps out of his car, looking up at my window. I don't wave. Don't acknowledge him. Some chapters need to end without resolution. The perfume bottle catches the last rays of sunlight, throwing rainbow patterns across my bare walls. Empty vessels, casting beautiful illusions. Isn't that what all our promises were, in the end? I turn away from the window, toward my new life. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting free.
My name is Laura, and I want to tell you about a part of my life that shaped me in ways I never imagined. I'm a 38-year-old real estate agent, and my life has taken me through a roller coaster of emotions and experiences. I'm still processing it all, but here's how it unfolded. 6 years ago, I was happily married to my first husband, James. He was an architect, full of ambition and dreams. But fate had other plans. One day, while working on a construction site, a terrible accident took him from me. I was left alone, navigating the world as a widow. The grief was overwhelming, and the void he left was immense. In the aftermath, I inherited around $400,000, a portion of which was shared with James's family. Financially, I was secure, but emotionally, I felt hollow. The pain of losing him was raw and relentless. I continued working, trying to keep myself busy and focused, but loneliness was my constant companion. It was during this challenging period that I met Tom. He was a cheerful and easygoing colleague in the tech industry. His laughter and optimism were like a breath of fresh air in my life. Tom had this way of making everything seem lighter, even when I was struggling internally. We became friends, and over time, his presence filled a part of my heart that I didn't realize was still aching. Tom was a former software engineer who had left his career to help his aging father. We started dating, and his charm was irresistible. It wasn't long before we decided to marry. It felt like a new beginning, a chance to rebuild and find happiness again. Tom grew up with his father, Frank, who was a 75-year-old retired entrepreneur. Frank had built several successful businesses throughout his career, but he was known for being frugal. Tom, on the other hand, never understood his father's cautious approach to money. To him, Frank seemed stingy and overly careful. After our wedding, Tom convinced me to move in with Frank. His health was declining, and he needed help with daily tasks. Tom decided to quit his job and become a full-time homemaker, taking on the responsibility of caring for his father. I supported this decision, although it meant taking on more responsibilities myself. I continued working as a real estate agent, managing both my career and the growing demands of our home life. In the beginning, Tom was attentive. He managed household chores and took care of Frank as promised. However, as time went on, his enthusiasm waned. His efforts began to dwindle, and he became increasingly lazy. The burden of housework fell on me, despite my demanding job. I found myself juggling both roles, feeling the strain of balancing work and home life, while Tom seemed indifferent to the responsibilities he had once eagerly embraced. Frank, despite his declining health, was always kind to me. He shared stories of his entrepreneurial ventures, including a project that had gone awry, a luxury textile business in Italy. It was an extravagant venture that had consumed much of Frank's wealth. He spoke of it with a mix of regret and wisdom, a reminder of the risks involved in business. Tom never appreciated his father's careful handling of money. He frequently called Frank stingy and complained about not living more lavishly. His constant dissatisfaction with Frank's frugality was a source of tension between them. Tom's attitude began to impact our relationship, and I felt caught in the middle. As Tom's laziness increased, so did his spending habits. He started using my savings to buy luxury items like designer watches and high-end electronics without asking for my permission. When I discovered that he had drained nearly $20,000 in just a few weeks, I was furious. I confronted him, demanding to know why he had been so reckless with our finances. Despite the confrontation, I hesitated to take drastic steps like filing for divorce. My main concern was Frank. He was still dependent on us for care, and I didn't want to leave him in a vulnerable position. I chose to stay, hoping things might improve, while dealing with the growing frustration of Tom's financial irresponsibility. Little did I know that the real shock was yet to come. Frank's health continued to decline, and it was clear that his time was drawing near. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier, and Tom's dissatisfaction became more pronounced. As we approached the end, I was unaware of the storm that was brewing beneath the surface, waiting to unravel everything I thought I knew about our lives. Frank passed away quietly one evening, his departure marking the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter for me and Tom. It was a somber time, and the house felt emptier than ever. The funeral was filled with mourners, and as we moved through the formalities, Tom's demeanor was unsettlingly calm. He seemed detached, almost too composed. In the days following the funeral, something changed in Tom. He was suddenly more focused on the financial side of things, and his attitude became increasingly arrogant. It was then that he revealed his true intentions. "I need to talk to you about something important," Tom said one afternoon, his tone carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "What is it?" I asked, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Tom handed me a stack of papers. "I've been thinking. Since Frank is gone, I believe there's a significant inheritance coming our way. I've done some calculations, and I'm confident it's around $200 million. I was stunned. $200 million? How did you come to that figure? Tom leaned back, a smug smile on his face. Frank's business ventures were risky, but he was wealthy. I've looked into things, and it seems that this amount is what he left behind. I was confused, but Frank always spoke about the failed textile business in Italy. He lost a lot of money on that. Tom waved his hand dismissively. That's just what he wanted us to believe. The real money is tied up elsewhere. The more Tom spoke, the more uneasy I became. It felt like he was spinning a tale to suit his own narrative. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about his claims. Tom's behavior became more erratic. He started making grand plans about how we would spend the inheritance. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, and high-end cars were all part of his vision. He made no effort to hide his excitement, and it was clear that he had already spent a significant amount of money in his mind. One day, I discovered that Tom had been using our savings to buy extravagant items without consulting me. There were receipts for designer watches, top-tier electronics, and even a high-end sports car. When I confronted him about it, he brushed off my concerns with a wave of his hand. "It's all going to be worth it, Laura. Once the inheritance comes through, we'll have more than enough," he said with a dismissive tone. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. Despite the confrontation, I was torn. The idea of leaving Tom while dealing with Frank's estate seemed daunting. I was worried about the impact on Frank's legacy and the potential chaos that could ensue. Tom's spending continued unabated. He drained nearly $20,000 from our savings in just a few weeks, leaving me feeling helpless and betrayed. I confronted him again, but his response was always the same, assurances that everything would be fine once the inheritance came through. As the days turned into weeks, the tension between us grew. Tom's laziness was now matched by his reckless spending. He was more focused on his imagined fortune than on the reality of our situation. I felt increasingly isolated and frustrated, struggling to balance my job and the responsibilities at home while Tom did nothing to help. It was clear that Tom's expectations were unrealistic. He continued to live in a fantasy world where $200 million was just around the corner, while the reality of our finances and his irresponsible behavior weighed heavily on me. One evening, as I was going through some paperwork, I came across a document from Frank's lawyer. It was an outline of Frank's financial situation and estate planning. My heart raced as I read through the details. The luxury textile business in Italy had indeed consumed a significant portion of Frank's wealth, but what caught my eye was the information about collateral for debts.
It was clear now.
The $200 million Tom had been counting on was actually tied up as collateral for Frank's failed business venture. The real inheritance amounted to only $40,000, a modest sum compared to Tom's expectations. I felt a mix of relief and dread. The truth was finally out, and it was worse than I had imagined. Tom's fantasies were about to come crashing down, and I had to confront the reality of our situation. The day came when Frank's estate was to be settled. Tom was exuberant, making grand plans for the future. I remained quiet, knowing that the truth would soon shatter his illusions. As Tom eagerly awaited the inheritance, I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. The day arrived when the estate details were to be finalized, and the air was thick with anticipation. Tom had been eagerly preparing for what he was certain would be the beginning of a new, opulent chapter in his life. I, on the other hand, had spent the past few days grappling with the truth of Frank's financial situation and the reality of the inheritance. Tom's optimism was palpable as he paraded around the house, discussing future plans that included lavish vacations, a new mansion, and luxury vehicles. I could barely contain my anxiety. I knew that the truth would hit Tom like a freight train, and I had no idea how he would react. That morning, Tom was in high spirits, confident that his calculations and expectations would be confirmed. We had a meeting with Frank's lawyer to finalize the estate matters. Tom was dressed in his best suit, exuding a misplaced confidence that only made my unease grow. As we sat in the lawyer's office, the tension was almost unbearable. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, started by reviewing the financial documents and discussing the estate distribution. Tom leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began. As per the last will and testament of Frank Collins, the estate has been evaluated, and the assets are allocated as follows. Tom's excitement was evident, and he barely let Mr. Harrison finish his sentences. But as the lawyer continued, it became clear that Tom's expectations were about to be shattered. Due to Frank's failed business venture in Italy, a substantial portion of his wealth was used as collateral for debts. Consequently, the majority of the $200 million is tied up in debt repayment, Mr. Harrison explained. Tom's face fell.
What?
That can't be right. There must be some mistake. I watched as Tom's world crumbled before my eyes. Mr. Harrison continued calmly. The real net inheritance amounts to $40,000. The rest is encumbered by the debts from the failed venture. Tom's anger erupted. This can't be happening. I've already spent so much, expecting a fortune. There's no way this is true. The lawyer tried to maintain his composure. I understand this is a difficult situation, Mr. Collins, but the financial details are accurate. The debts were substantial, and Frank's assets were used to cover them. Tom's frustration boiled over. You have to be kidding me. I've been living in a fantasy for months, thinking I was going to be rich. How could Frank do this? I felt a pang of sympathy mixed with relief. I knew how devastating this was for Tom, but I also knew it was the harsh reality he needed to face. The facade of a golden future was crumbling, and the weight of his own greed was becoming painfully evident. Tom stormed out of the office, his face flushed with rage and disbelief. I followed him, trying to keep my composure. As we got into the car, Tom's anger was palpable. He started shouting, his words a mix of curses and accusations. "This is all your fault," he yelled. "You knew about the debts, didn't you? You kept this from me." I was taken aback. "Tom, I didn't know for sure. I only discovered the truth recently. I tried to warn you." Tom's anger didn't subside. "You should have told me earlier. Now I'm left with nothing because of you." I remained silent, realizing that no amount of explanation would change Tom's perception. His world was in ruins, and he was desperately looking for someone to blame. That evening, Tom was a different person. The person who had been so optimistic and full of grand plans was now a shadow of himself. He was bitter, disillusioned, and struggling to accept the reality of his situation. I could see how much his own expectations had clouded his judgment and led him to squander our resources. Tom tried to reach out to me, begging for another chance. "Laura, please. I was wrong. I spent too much, and I thought we were going to be wealthy.
Can we work something out?"
I looked at him with a mix of sadness and determination. "Tom, you can't keep blaming others for your mistakes. You had your chance to be honest and responsible, but you chose to live in a fantasy. I can't continue like this." His pleas continued, but I was resolute. I had seen enough. The man I had married was not the person I thought I knew. His greed and entitlement had blinded him to reality, and now he was paying the price. The $40,000 that remained from Frank's estate felt like a small consolation prize compared to the grand dreams Tom had built up. It was a modest sum, but it was enough for me to start anew. I knew I had to move on, to find my own path away from the chaos and betrayal that had marked my marriage. As Tom struggled to cope with his financial reality, I began making plans to move out. It was a difficult decision, but I felt it was necessary for my own well-being. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to face it with courage and resilience. As I prepared to leave the house for the last time, the weight of the past few months settled heavily on my shoulders. Tom's reaction to the estate's reality had been explosive and unsettling, and now, as I packed up the last of my belongings, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come from the person I was when we first met. The small apartment I had rented was modest, but comfortable. It was a far cry from the grand houses Tom had dreamed of, but it represented a new beginning, a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. I had managed to set aside the $40,000 inheritance from Frank, and while it wasn't a fortune, it was enough to start fresh. Tom, meanwhile, was spiraling further into despair. The realization that the $200 million was nothing more than a myth had hit him hard. He had already spent much of his savings in anticipation of the inheritance, and now, with only the $40,000 to fall back on, he faced a bleak financial future. I'd seen him on a few occasions after the estate meeting, but he was barely recognizable as the man I had married. His once bright and hopeful demeanor had been replaced with a defeated and bitter attitude. One afternoon, a week after the estate fiasco, I received a call from Tom. His voice was tinged with desperation. "Laura, I'm struggling. I've been trying to get by, but it's not working. I can't keep up with my bills. Can you help me?" I was torn. On one hand, I felt a pang of sympathy for him. On the other, I had to remind myself of the reason I left. "Tom, I've been trying to move on and find my own path. I'm not in a position to help you financially. You need to figure things out on your own." He sighed heavily. "I get it. I've made mistakes, and I'm paying for them now. I'm sorry for everything." It was the first time he had truly admitted his faults to me. His apology was a small step, but it didn't change the fact that our lives had diverged irreparably. I hoped he would use this moment of clarity to turn his life around, but I couldn't be a part of that process. With the apartment set up and my job continuing to provide a stable income, I found a sense of peace in my new routine. I had started to reconnect with old friends and rediscover interests that had been overshadowed during my marriage. It was an empowering experience, one that reminded me of my own strength and resilience. A few months later, I received a letter from Frank's lawyer. It was a brief but kind note, acknowledging the difficult situation and offering a small token of appreciation for my support during Frank's final days. Enclosed was a check for $5,000. It was a generous gesture, but more than that, It symbolized Frank's acknowledgement of my role in his life. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, there were still small acts of kindness and recognition. Tom's situation, on the other hand, continued to deteriorate. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he had taken a part-time job, struggling to make ends meet. His financial troubles were compounded by his inability to cope with the reality of his situation. I knew that Tom had always been driven by a desire for wealth and status, and without the inheritance he had so eagerly anticipated, he was left grappling with his own sense of worth. As time went on, I began to see the benefits of the choices I had made. The independence I had fought for was more than just financial, it was a reclaiming of my own life and identity. I felt a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. The lessons learned from my relationship with Tom and the betrayal I had endured had strengthened me. I knew that I could face whatever challenges came my way with resilience and self-awareness. One evening, as I sat in my new apartment, looking out over the city, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain and hardship I had experienced were now distant memories, overshadowed by the strength I had gained. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. Tom's story was a cautionary tale of greed and entitlement, a reminder of how easily one could be blinded by the lure of easy money and false promises. My story was one of recovery and self-discovery. I had learned to value myself beyond material wealth and had found peace in living authentically. As I closed the door to the apartment and stepped into the night, I felt a sense of finality and freedom. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. I walked confidently into the city, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, knowing that I had emerged from the shadows of my past stronger and wiser.